for you guys having me on here. I think that this is information that people need to know, and some of this stuff might be stuff that you're already doing. So if you're already doing some of this stuff, then great. I just want to kind of shed some light onto not only what's going on with the PPP. We still have the EIDL out there, and then I was hoping that this would never happen again, but it looks like we also have another stimulus package on the horizon. So we'll kind of get into some of the stuff that we see going on there as well. So let's kind of start here on the PPP status. And so like Stan and I were talking about before, banks are starting to accept the forgiveness applications for most businesses. There is some banks, some of the smaller banks, they aren't accepting it under a certain dollar amount, but most all banks right now are accepting them if you want to do that. The deadline for submission has been pushed back really far ahead. And so the deadline for submitting these PPP applications is actually 10 months after the end of your 24-week period ends. And so most people, that puts your actual deadline for when you need to do the application into like June or July of next year. I'm not advocating that you can wait that long or you should wait that long, but it does give us some flexibility on that. And so if you got your loan back in April, 24-week period would put you at about October of when it ended. And then 10 months after that is when you officially have to have your application back in. Now, what we've been seeing for a lot of banks is a lot of banks are pushing our clients to get this in there. The long and short of it is if you should do the forgiveness application now or wait, I'm telling people if your banker really wants it and they're trying to push for it, just do it and be done with it. It's really not something that takes very long. I've actually done a couple webinars which will guide you on how to do the two major applications that most people are going to be doing. And I'll share those links here at the end, and then I'll also give it to you guys so you guys can email it out to people as well. It's very, very straightforward. Most people should be able to use the easy application. Really, the only stipulation that would allow you to not be able to use the easy application was if you reduced your employees. And now, one of the things that I've heard about this a lot is it doesn't mean that you had let anyone go and then brought them back, or if you had someone retire. It's if you let someone go and you never replace them between when you got the PPP money and now. So let's say you had a technician, just wasn't producing that much. You guys just didn't have the work and you let him go for 3 weeks. Hey, once I got the PPP money, I rehired that person back, then you do not get penalized for something like that. However, if you had furloughed someone or laid someone off and you just never replaced that person, you went from 5 employees down to 4 employees, then technically you would not qualify for the easy application. Now, a couple of situations that I've seen a lot, which actually don't penalize you, which a lot of people thought that they were being penalized for, is there's a lot of shops out there that had employees that just left on their own accord. Hey, you know what, boss? I don't feel comfortable coming in. I'm just not going to come in. They fired themselves. You might have allowed them to collect unemployment because of the relationship that you had, but that actually doesn't count against your forgiveness application. Let's say that you had a person, we had some people that just retired. You know what? The writing's on the wall, all this stuff going on here. I'm 68 years old. I'm hanging them up. I'm done. That would look like a reduction in headcount, but you actually wouldn't be penalized for that, and you would still be allowed to do the easy application. Another one is if you fire for someone for cause, that doesn't go against it as well. Really, the general idea that you're trying to remember here is what the intent of these laws as they were written is. They don't want people going out and saying, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get $200,000 of PPP money. I don't really have that much business. I'm going to lay everyone off and I'm just going to keep all that money. That's not what this was intended to do. The payroll protection program, just like the name intends, is it's trying to maintain people's payroll. Essentially what the government was doing here was making us as business owners be the ones subsidizing it and making sure that we maintain these people on payroll so they weren't all going to unemployment. Now, that being said, one of the biggest things about this is going to be taxable income to us. We got the biggest bait and switch of maybe our lives here, right? Because I have some people that got, I think my biggest one that we did was about $1.2 million in PPP is what they got. When this all came out before, this was not going to be taxable income. Hey, this is just a money. This is free money. But just like anything that the government does, there's always a catch to this, right? And so what they came out and they said is, well, the actual money itself is not going to be taxable income to you. However, all of the expenses that you use to pay for this with, whether it be rent, utilities, all that stuff is actually going to be not a deduction for you. So if I got $100,000 in PPP, that $100,000 in it as a itself is not actually taxable income. However, whatever expenses I use for my forgiveness application of that 100 grand is no longer a deduction. A bit of a shell game, but what it means is a long and short of is whatever you got on the PPP money, you're going to have to pay tax on it. And more importantly, some guidance that we just got here recently, that money is actually going to happen this year. And so when this came out, a lot of these instructions had been as clear as mud on this, and they were ever changing. And so the way that this was written is the PPP is actually a loan. It is not actually, income until it's forgiven, or that's the guidance that a lot of people had. And so there's a lot of people that were kind of talking about, well, do I want to delay my forgiveness application until next year? That way I can kick the can forward. I can pay tax on it next year. I've seen that talk a lot, and the IRS must have heard about it. And so what the IRS came out and they said was, if you got your PPP this year and you have reasonable expectation that's going to be forgiven, then you have to count that as income for this year. I think almost every single shop that's listening to this in the country, that's going to apply to them, meaning that this is going to be taxable income this year. You got your PPP back in April, your 24 weeks ended in October, you probably spent this money 3 times over. We're not going to have a very good justification on we didn't think that this was going to be forgiven. Now, that is not the worst thing, that this money is going to be taxable income this year. And really for most of my clients, I was really advocating for this to be taxable income this year. The reason that I want this to be taxable income this year is really 2 things. The first thing is we have the money, right? The government gave us this money. We spent it even after the taxes. Most shops were having pretty good years. We have the cash to pay for this tax. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the tax rates are only going to go in one direction going forward. Tax rates right now this year are historically low, at least since I've been alive. I don't think, keeping politics out of this, I think that there's unanimous consent that taxes are only going to do one of 2 things going forward. They're either going to stay the same or they're going to go up. And so one of the things that I was being very, very cautious on some of my clients that wanted to play this game and kick the can forward on this is, well, hey, let's say that you go out and you have $150,000, you push it forward, you don't recognize that as income this year, you recognize as income next year. Tax rates go up 10%. Just by pushing this forward a year, you just cost yourself $15,000, if you're going to go in that absolute sense, which is a monstrous hit just for giving you a little bit more time to pay this money. Now, that being said, it's really looking like that we won't have that choice and it's going to be all recognized this year, but it's just kind of something going into the mindset of it. So if you're in a situation right now and you're deciding whether to do it this year or do it next year, I would not have any tax consideration on that because we've found out that it's not really going to make a difference for tax purposes. If you have the time and your bank is ready to do it, I would go ahead and do that. Now, a little bit of word of advice here, and I will, kind of share those links forward to kind of walk you through this stuff, but we are going to use the 24-week period no matter what, unless we reduced our headcount for the 24-week period and the 8-week we had spent all the money and we had proper amount of headcount. If that is the case and you can only do 8 weeks, then fine, do 8 weeks. The reason I like to do the 24 weeks though, if we can, is because if we use the 24 weeks, most all businesses will be able to use it solely for payroll. Doesn't mean that that's the only thing that you spent this money on, but it means when I do my forgiveness application, I will be able to submit just my payroll documentation and that will satisfy it. Most of the ones that I've been doing with 24 weeks for a shop for just payroll, people were probably about 2 to 3 times covered. If they'd gotten 100 grand, they'd probably spent $200,000 to $300,000 in that 24-week period on just payroll alone. And so not only is that going to make my life easier, that's also going to be my banker's life, right? And so we need to make sure that we're making our banker's life easier, because if we're making their life easier, they're going to be quicker to accept this, stamp it, and move on. And if they stamp it and they approve it, then all it has to do is go to SBA, and SBA is going to essentially be rubber stamping these from the most part. Just like when we did the original PPP application, the big hurdle was getting all the information to our bank. Once the bank had accepted our PPP application, it was pretty much a formality and the SBA would fund it. It's the exact same thing on a forgiveness application. If the banks have been okay with it, I have not had one single client get any bounce back from the SBA. Bank approves it, SBA approves it. Now, a little thing behind here on why we are making sure that the bank is okay with it and why you might see the bank kind of pressuring you to get some of this stuff done is the banks, when they gave you your PPP money, whether you got 20 grand or $2 million, the bank actually used their own money. And so the bank gave me as my business, gave me $300,000. The bank is using their own lending to give me that money. And they do not get that money back from the SBA until I get my application forgiven. And more importantly for the banks is the banks made between 3 and 5% of your PPP amount as fees for doing this for the SBA. The banks don't get paid their fees until this gets forgiven either. And so if some of you out there listening that are saying, hey, my banker's really hounding me on this, this is why. They're getting that from the top because they want their money and they want to move on with this. Personally, if I'm a business owner, I want to be done with this as soon as possible, which is why I just want to do my forgiveness application and be done with it. And which is why I also probably just want to recognize this as taxes. I don't think we'll have a choice on that, but let's just try and move on with our life. And I think for the most part here, we can all agree, try and forget about this year as quick as possible. So that being said, on taxes, let's kind of go into a little bit of tax planning related to this. So as a general rule of thumb, you should be working with your accountant on this. This is something where you should be dealing with professionals and saying, hey, where do we stand? How much do I need to set aside? What is this going to look like? Is there ways that we can minimize this? What I'm giving you is advice to go on top of that planning. This planning that I'm giving you should not be your tax planning for the year. You should also be dealing with your accountant that can give you specific information based on your situation. But if you have a PPP, as a general rule of thumb, if your business is pretty steady otherwise, you're going to owe about 25% of your PPP loan in a form of tax. If you got $100,000 in PPP, you should set aside about $25,000 to be able to pay the tax on it. If you got $200,000 in PPP, you should set aside about 50 grand to make sure that you have the money set aside for that. Now, let's talk about different ways that we can maximize this, or we can try to offset some of this burden. You can see on there the first line, first and foremost, cash is king, all right? We are not out of this. Just like we saw in the beginning when all of this stuff started hitting, profitability can dry up pretty quickly. And this year, people have had a lot of really, really good years and profitability has been very good. And people are accumulating a lot of cash. But now is not the time to get lax on that and start to spend too much money and put ourselves into a vulnerable cash position. It's all it takes is a governor coming out or a mayor coming out or a local municipality coming out and saying, hey, you know what? We have cases that are surging. We're going to shut this stuff down. And profit is like a faucet. You can turn that off in a day and all of a sudden you're not making any money. And if we don't have the proper cash reserves, things are going to get really tight. So any of these tax planning situations that we're going to go down through, we are going to be saving tax money, but it's going to be at the expense of our cash. And so we need to make sure that we're still maintaining our cash and spending our money effectively if we're trying to minimize tax here. So first and foremost, my favorite one here is funding your retirement accounts. I hear people all the time that talk about this and they say, hey, Hunt, I want to get into the gray areas. I want to do what to get the tax breaks that the rich do. And I won't even kind of get creative on any of this stuff until you're maxing out your retirement account. Whether you have a simple IRA, whether you have a traditional IRA, whether you have a 401k, there is no better deduction out there than maxing that out. We are literally getting a tax deduction for putting money in our own pocket. And also coupled with the fact is there's annual limits on there. And so if we're not meeting our annual limits, maybe next year, if we want to make all that stuff up, we're going to be limited by how much we can put in there. And so there's no better deduction out there for a retirement account. But going back to what I was talking about before, cash is king. Retirement accounts are a one-way street. If you're 40 years old and you put your money into a retirement account, you more or less can't touch that money for 20 years without being heavily penalized on it. And so I would never be in a position where I'm just putting a ton of money and really strapping myself into the retirement account unless it's something I absolutely know that I don't need in the immediate future and I want to put some money away. The next one on here that is probably the most used or most talked about is buying equipment, buying vehicles, buying stuff for my shop. Now, going back to the whole idea of we're making sure that we're spending this money effectively, you need to sit down and ask yourself two questions if you're looking at buying a piece of equipment or a vehicle or something like that. Number one is this going to generate me more money? Okay. Am I getting an alignment rack because I'm going to start doing alignment racks? I'm going to start generating profit on it, right? It's going to pay for itself. Hey, you know what? I had a tire balancer that's really just not working correctly, and I'm not able to do this as quickly. It's not making me any money. I need to replace it. Both of those are very good situations. Another one is I was planning on doing this the first part of next year anyways. Hey, you know what? This one lift is kind of still working, but I'm probably going to replace it the first quarter of next year anyways, because it's just really on its last legs. If the answer to either of those questions is yes, let's do it now, and let's be done with it. Now, if you have stuff out there, and I see this a lot with like trucks, well, would it make sense if I just go out and buy a $70,000 diesel truck? Yeah, I mean, we'll save a lot of money on taxes, but rough numbers, $70,000 a truck, on a good day, it's going to save us $20,000 in taxes. We're still out 50 grand in cash. And so if it's something that you were going to need to replace your vehicle, then fine, but be very careful of that slippery slope of, well, hey, I'm just buying it to save money on taxes. We're still out to cash, and so we need to be conscientious of that. End of year bonuses for team. If you want to pay out bonuses, it's been a hard year for a lot of people. You had a team that stuck by you. Hey, that's great. Make sure that the bonuses get done, and they get done this year. If you're going to do them through payroll, make sure that you do them now in this month, and you don't do them like the last day of the year and it actually carries over to next year. So really good thing to be able to do for your team. Whether you're doing gift cards, whether you're doing bonuses, whether you're doing different kind of perks for your team, just make sure it gets captured in this year so we can try and offset some of this PPP money. Another one on here that's a really good one that's been expanded within the last couple of years that allows us to do this a little bit more aggressively is different capital improvements and building repairs. Hey, maybe I need to fix up my parking lot. Maybe I need to restripe it. Maybe I need to seal coat it. Maybe I need to put a new roof on my building, new signage, whatever it might be. All of those that I just mentioned there qualify for accelerated depreciation. Meaning if I go out and I put a new roof on my building and I spend $60,000, I can write all of that off in the first year. Okay. Whether you're financing this stuff or whether you're buying it outright for tax purposes, it does not make a difference. So let's talk about the alignment rack. If you go out and you get a alignment rack through Hunter, you're going to be paying what, $1,200, $1,500 a month for 60 months financing on that. We actually can treat that for tax purposes like you bought it all this year, and we can write it all off this year if we choose to. So there is some flexibility on that depending on how the lease and stuff like that is set up. The last one on here is really last for a reason because it's kind of like the last thing. If you've done everything else, really the only other stretch thing that you can do if your cash position is okay is, hey, property taxes are usually due mid-year. If they send you a bill and you know what your property tax is, you can pay for that this year. Take the tax advantage this year. If you're thinking about doing advertising campaigns for the first quarter of next year, hey, maybe we pay our direct mail advertiser and say, hey, we're going to pay for this now. Let's take the expense, and that will cover the first couple of months of advertising for next year. Other expenses like that, we can accelerate that and make sure that gets paid in this year, not next year. Not going to be probably a huge change either way, unless you have some monstrous property tax bill or monstrous advertising bills, but it's just little stuff here and there that we can chip away with it. But again, I can't stress this enough. Do not use all of your cash just to try and save tax money. We need to make sure that we have a set amount of cash, whatever the amount that we want to have is, that we don't go down below that, even if we're trying to save money on taxes. If I want to get through this and I want to make sure I have 100 grand and I have $150,000 in my bank account, I only have $50,000 that I could spend right now. So that's where I want to probably be smart. Hey, if some of my vendors are allowing me to do 12 months same as cash financing for this equipment, I'm going to use that instead of using my own cash. hey, if I'm down to $105,000, I'm probably just not going to max out and put $20,000 in my retirement account. It's going to put me in too much of a vulnerable position. So just make sure that you're conscientious of this. Make sure that you're talking to your accountant, talking to professionals. Make sure that you're doing the right things here, and you're not shooting yourself in the foot and putting yourself into a bad position. All right, so let's go to the next one on here. The EIDL. So the EIDL is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. It was run through the SBA. A lot of shops have already gotten this. When they were rolling this out originally, you could get up to $500,000, but that went away pretty quick. And so most shops that applied for this got $150,000. For those of you that have not received this or have not applied for this, the SBA is still accepting applications for this. Now, this is a loan. It's a true loan. It's a very good loan, but it is a true loan. And so it's a 30-year loan at 3.75% interest with no payments for 12 months. And so it's a very, very cheap and affordable loan. I'm advocating most all of my shops to get it unless you're in a position where you just have more cash and you know what to do with. In a perfect world, I get this EIDL loan so that I have that rainy day fund, that I have that money set aside. And let's say 6-8 months from now, hopefully we're in a better position. We have a little bit better outlook on things. I don't need it, then fine. I pay the interest on it. I give them back their money and we move on with our lives. You know, while we don't have any payments on it for 12 months, we are going to be accruing interest. And so it's going to cost me about $600 a month, $650 a month to have access to $150,000. The way that I look at it is that's my insurance policy. Most people out there, whether the cash reserves that you have plus the EIDL, you should have plenty of money to weather whatever storm happens if it does happen here again. If you've already gotten the EIDL, most shops are already getting statements for their monthly payments. So if you're getting a monthly statement, it should show you how much you're accruing in interest. If you would like to start chipping down on that interest now, then fine, go for it. There's nothing against that. We're gonna have to pay it eventually. If for whatever reason you feel like you're in a position where you don't need that money and you just want to get rid of that interest amount, then you have the statement there and you can pay off the full balance. You know, I'm going to throw a random number out there, but unless you have like $300,000 or $400,000 in the bank, I'm going to be very, very careful about paying back that EIDL money. Once I pay it back, I'm not going to be able to go back and apply for that and get it back again. This is a one-time shot at this. And kind of seeing some of the numbers that are coming out and seeing what some of these states are doing with shutdowns like that, I'm probably going to hang on to that money at least for a couple months and just kind of see what the heck is going on here. Be careful what you use this on. And so this is not carte blanche for you to go out and buy a new bass boat. This is not carte blanche for you to go out and just spend some money. They want you to use this for ongoing operating expenses of the business. So general day-to-day stuff, payroll, rent, utilities, insurance, you know, your parts vendors, all of that stuff that's what they want you to use this on. They don't want you to use this to buy a second location. They don't want you to use this to buy equipment. And more importantly, they don't want you to get this money and you pay down higher interest debt. You know, I've already heard some people talking about this. Hey, I got a line of credit that's 6.75%. It's right about the same amount, it's $150,000. Why don't I just use their $150,000? I'll pay down that and I'll just do a little bit of interest rate arbitrage here and just save some money. They don't want us to do that. They want us to use it for ongoing operating expenses. They want to make sure that we're using it for our own cash reserves. The last one there, to pay back now or hold on to, like I was saying, you know, unless you're really in a position where I'm never ever going to need this, I would really hold on to it. We have kind of a tricky couple months coming up here and we just don't know what's going to happen. You know, it doesn't matter what you believe and what's going on or how this was handled. I think that the biggest thing that we can all agree on here is that we are at the mercy of the government right now. Everything could be looking fine. We personally could be doing fine. The business could be doing fine. And we feel like that the cases are manageable. And depending on where you are, you could still have a municipality come out and say, doesn't matter, we're shut down, and our business grinds to a halt. So be very careful with that. Hang on to your money, make sure that we're doing the right things and making sure that we're setting ourselves up and also our team up, right? You know, we run a business here that supports a lot of families. We want to make sure that we are ensuring that we can get through this and get through this with as little amount of gray hair as possible. So final thing here I wanted to touch on, and this is something that's been coming up a lot. So there's a stimulus package. I haven't checked on it today, but as of last check, they're still arguing about this in Congress. Now, someone can chime in here if they pass it, but I don't think that they have. But what they're talking about right now that unanimously they've agreed on is the federal unemployment assistance. As of right now, that is set to expire, I believe, here in about 2 weeks. And so in the past, before all this happened, when you got unemployment, you got money from the state. Depending on what state you're in, it has a different amount of what you got. I'm based out of Maryland. In Maryland, the max weekly unemployment was about $500 a week. What they're doing now is if you are qualified for state unemployment, the feds are giving you an extra $300 on top of that. And so that would take my unemployment benefits in Maryland from $300 up to $800, or from $500 up to $800. Now, in the height of all of this, that was up to $600 a week. And so we kind of got into that weird situation where some people were making more money to stay at home than they were at the shop. There is some calls for that number to go back up to the 600. I just don't see a big chance that that will actually happen. I think that the 300 is probably pretty locked in, especially because that is set to expire here at the end of the year. Another thing that they're talking about here is a second round of PPP funding. The second round of PPP funding, we don't have a whole lot of information about that right now. From some of the things that I've been hearing, and when this was kind of introduced a couple months ago as well, is the second round of PPP funding is going to be tailored towards people that were the hardest hit by this. And so the official language that they have in there is it's tailored towards the restaurant and hospitality industry, but more specifically, most of the stuff is probably going to have a cap or a certain threshold that you have to meet for a decrease in sales. A lot of the stuff that I've been seeing is if you can show a 50% more decrease in your top line revenue, then you would qualify for this second round of PPP funding. I don't foresee this PPP funding be available or being something that's viable for most shops out there. I just don't think most people have been that affected by it where they could really have this happen. And then the last one that just really keeps on going back and forth here, is there going to be another round of stimulus payments? So we got the $1,200 or $2,400 back earlier in this, and there's a lot of talk on is there going to be another round of that? The bill that is introduced into the Senate right now, I do not believe has any stimulus payments on there, but this is kind of an area that they've been arguing back and forth. And I mean, they've been arguing about every single area of this, but this is a big one that's come up. Should we do another round of stimulus payments? Should we not? Now, for a business owner, the stimulus payments in themselves is probably not going to be their lifeline, right? You run a business, you have a lot of overhead, we have a lot of expenses. What's $1,200 going to do for my business? However, that stimulus payment, as we saw early in the year, does a lot for our customer base. I know firsthand, I've seen with a lot of my shops that I work with, when the stimulus payments came out, all of a sudden you had some people that had declined service in the past that came out of the woodworks and said, hey, you know what? I finally have some money to do this. Let's go ahead and let's, do what we started, or, hey, I'll give you the okay to do that drive shaft or whatever they just couldn't afford before. So second round of stimulus payments could be something that could be really good for the business, not in the absolute sense of we're getting the money, but our customers are getting money, our clients are getting the money, and then hopefully give them more money to spend with us. Again, all of this is an unknown. All of this stuff is ever changing. I believe they have until next week to get something passed. And after next week, they're going on their winter break, and I don't think that they will meet back in until January again. So it's either going to happen here. I think a lot of talk is if it doesn't happen by this week, it's probably not going to happen at all. So we'll just kind of keep our eyes out here for the next couple of days. And that about wraps it up. I included some links on here, and Maddie, I will get these to you so that you can email them out to people as well. The first link on here is a tutorial on how to do the 3508S forgiveness application. So if you got $50,000 or less in PPP, they gave us a really, really easy one-page report on how to do the forgiveness application. And on that YouTube link, I will walk you through how to do it, how to get your numbers, how to fill it out, what some of the pitfalls are. If you have all the information in front of you, that should take you no more than 10 to 15 minutes. Very, very straightforward. The next one that most other people are going to be doing is going to be the 3508 EZ application. And that's for someone that didn't reduce their head count, but got more than $50,000 in PPP. Again, I used one of my clients' numbers and walked down through and did that for you guys. And so I think that with that and with the information that you have from your payroll provider, you should be able to knock it out. It shouldn't take you any more than a half hour. If you have to do the long form for whatever reason, I'd be very, very careful with it. It's can be very complicated, and I really should probably get a professional involved in it. I have not had a single client that's had to do the long form. Almost all of my clients have been able to do either the 3508S or the EZ. If for whatever reason you have to do a long form, first and foremost, I would check with your accountant to make sure that you even have to do the long form. I've had a couple people that started to do this and they were doing a long form. It just wasn't necessary for them. But if you do have to do it, that one can get tricky. And that's something that most people probably would not be able to do unassisted. The last two on here is I got a link on here for the EIDL application. If you have not done so already, go on there, apply for it. The worst they can say is no. It should take you about 10 minutes to apply for it. It's very, very easy. So if you have not done so, I recommend doing so. And then the last one on there is just a link to our Facebook page. So, this stuff is ever changing. We try our best to keep periodic updates on there. And so if you want to like us and follow us on there, all this stuff will come up and, as we hear about it and as we hear changes. And so that's about all I got. Do we got any questions coming in? Anything that we need to clarify here?
Hunt, what are you seeing as the average turnaround time as far as a forgiveness application?
So just like with the PPP application themselves, I don't think we're getting the best information from the bankers. And so the bankers that I really trust, that I actually believe that they've submitted to the SBA, is once the bank has accepted it and they submit it to the SBA, turnaround and acceptance from the SBA has been less than 72 hours, about 3 days.
Wow.
Some banks have been pretty quick. Like I did one for one of my clients. I submitted to them probably 10 o'clock in the morning. The bank had approved it that day by lunchtime. And then the following day he had SBA approval. I've had other people that have been stuck in limbo for a month, but I'm not really sure if that's the SBA sitting on it. If I had to guess, it's still the bank trying to get their stuff together.
Okay.
Good question. You got anything else?
Yeah, I had submitted a question.
Cool. What's your question, Brian?
It's probably fairly simple, but we had originally asked for the free, I think it's EIDL money. Well, we didn't get in the first round when it was 10,000. It changed to 8,000. We did get that. Mm-hmm. And we were waiting for the PPP money stuff. We filled out that application. We got that approved and included and told them about the 8,000 EIDL money we got. So they were aware. Then they come back with the figure that they gave us for the PPP. Deposited the money, we got it. But now, a few months down the road, my bank is saying that the 8,000 is going to be reducing my PPP amount. They basically forgive everything except for the 8,000.
Little bait and switch there, huh?
Yeah, and I was just trying to figure that out because we understood that 8,000 is free money. We told them about that 8,000 when we did the application for the PPP, but they're still saying, that it has to be reduced. I'm just trying to make sure that's right. This is all in the last few days. I knew this little conference was coming up, and I thought this might be a good place to try to get it answered before I actually give my bank $8,000.
Yeah, exactly, because that's a one-way street. And so when you got the original PPP, they did not reduce your PPP by the 8,000 when you got it originally, right?
Right. They were aware of the 8,000,
but you still got your full PPP.
We got the full PPP. And then now my bank is saying they have to reduce the PPP by the amount that we got for the EIDL, that free money, EIDL, not the loan.
Yeah, and so they're exactly right. And so again, it's just kind of a weird one. I mean, the EIDL in itself is not taxable. It's not, you don't have to pay that back. But what they're saying is, well, Brian, you can keep that 8,000, but we're reducing your PPP amount by 8,000. So 6 1/2 dozen, you're going to owe the $8,000 back. The only thing that I've been seeing is some banks have been trying to charge interest on that. That's not allowed. I mean, there's no interest on this stuff. And so I've seen a couple people saying, hey, my bank is asking me to pay $8,322. And we've pushed back and said, no, we'll give you back the 8,000. There's no interest. You never even allowed us to pay this back earlier. How can you charge us interest? And they've all kind of came back and said, yeah, that's fine. We'll just take the original EIDL amount.
Well, I'm glad you said that because my bank told me that there's a daily interest charge and I needed to hurry up and make a decision.
So most of them are trying to do that to get you to give them their money. But if you look at it, if you read the loan documents, they can't charge you interest for that.
Well,
Because how can they charge you interest on something that there's no payment due on and there was no way for you to pay it back any earlier?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if they said, hey, you're going to give me that $8,000 and you've known about this for 6 months and you decide to keep it, Brian. But it's saying, hey, you told me to give you your $8,000, I gave it to you back. So I'd really push hard before I pay them any interest. I'll give you your money. I'm not giving you that interest.
Okay.
Cool. That answer your question?
I think so. It's not exactly what I was hoping to hear, but
I can tell you to keep it, but I'm gonna say the bank won't agree with me.
yeah.
Cool. And then Lorraine's asking here, how do we give that money back? And so Lorraine, you'll have to check with your bank on how they want it. Some banks have been asking for it right when you're doing your application, your forgiveness application. They're saying, hey, Lorraine, you're all forgiven. You owe us $8,000 back. Other ones have been kind of silent about it, but more or less set whatever money you got for that EIDL grant aside. And then at some point you're gonna have to pay it back, but it's not something that you need to do. Your bank will ask for it back. Cool. Awesome. Anything else?
Not unless you can change your answer.
Not unless I can change my answer. You know what, Brian, I'm going to allow it. Go back and say, hey, you know what? I was watching a webinar and Hunt said that I don't have to give you this $8,000 back. And you just send them a link to this and they probably should go along with it.
Yeah, I'll just tell them you said it. And
Yeah. Yeah. You can say you want $8,000, go collect it from Hunt. He has it. Cool. Awesome. Well, I will get this over to you guys. You guys have all the links. You can check any of this stuff out. And yeah, that should be about it.
If anybody has any further questions, can they send them to you, Hunt, or do you want them to send them to me and I'll just send them to you?
Yeah, if you want to send them to Maddie and then she can get a hold of me and ask me, that'd be great. Yep.
Perfect.
Cool.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, if there's no more questions, thank you, Hunt, so much for taking the time out and doing this. I'm sure that it'll be very helpful for a lot of people. A lot of shop owners are constantly asking us PPP questions and we're not the most qualified to answer them. So I'm sure that this will help us and help them in turn. So we appreciate you taking the time out. And like it says on there, be sure to go follow Paar Melis on Facebook. They also have an Instagram page. If you're looking for a new accountant, be sure to check them out. They are great and specialize in shop management accounting.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
All right. Talk to you guys later.
Bye.